Biographical criticism is a form of literary criticism which analyzes a writer's biography to show the relationship between the author's life and their works of literature. Biographical criticism is often associated with historical biographical criticism, a critical method that sees a literary work chiefly, if not exclusively, as a reflection of its author's life and times. This long-standing critical method dates back at least to the Renaissance period, and was employed extensively by Samuel Johnson in his Lives of the Poets 1779–81. Like any critical methodology, biographical criticism can be used with discretion and insight or employed as a superficial shortcut to understanding the literary work on its own terms through such strategies as formalism. Hence 19th-century biographical criticism came under disapproval by the so-called new critics of the 1920s, who coined the term biographical fallacy to describe criticism that neglected the imaginative genesis of literature. Notwithstanding this critique, biographical criticism remained a significant mode of literary inquiry throughout the 20th century, particularly in studies of Charles Dickens and F. Scott Fitzgerald, among others. The method continues to be employed in the study of such authors as John Steinbeck, Walt Whitman and William Shakespeare. In the Cambridge History of Literary Criticism, Classical Criticism, in a chapter titled, Peripatetic Biographical Criticism, George Alexander Kennedy notes that in the Hellenistic age, the works of authors were read as sources of information about their lives, personalities and interests. Some of this material was then used by other commentators and critics to explain passages in their works. The process became a circular one in that, though peripatetic biographers utilized external evidence where available, they had little to go on and quarried the texts for hints. Jackson J. Benson describes the form as a recognition of otherness, that there is an author who is different in personality and background from the reader, appears to be a simple-minded proposition. Yet as a basic prerequisite to the understanding and evaluation of a literary text, it is often ignored even by the most sophisticated literary critics. The exploration of otherness is what literary biography and biographical criticism can do best, discovering an author as a unique individual, a discovery that puts a burden on us to reach out to recognize that uniqueness before we can fully comprehend an author's writings. Biographical criticism shares in common with new historicism an interest in the fact that all literary works are situated in specific historical and biographical contexts from which they are generated. Biographical criticism, like new historicism, rejects the concept that literary studies should be limited to the internal or formal characteristics of a literary work, and insists that it properly includes a knowledge of the contexts in which the work was created. Biographical criticism stands in ambiguous relationship to Romanticism. It has often been argued that it is a development from Romanticism, but it also stands in opposition to the Romantic tendency to view literature as manifesting a universal transcendence of the particular conditions of its genesis. In The Art of Literary Biography, 1995, John Worthen writes, "The fact that we want an emergent sense of the inevitable development suggests the enormously soothing quality which biographies have come to have in our age. Not only do biographies suggest that things as difficult as human lives can for all their obvious complexity be summed up, known, comprehended, they reassure us that, while we are reading, a world will be created in which there are few or no unclear motives, muddled decisions, or indeed loose ends." When studying literature, biography and its relationship to literature is often a subject of literary criticism, and is treated in several different forms. Two scholarly approaches use biography or biographical approaches to the past as a tool for interpreting literature: literary biography and biographical criticism. Conversely, two genres of fiction rely heavily on the incorporation of biographical elements into their content: biographical fiction and autobiographical fiction. A literary biography is the biographical exploration of the lives of writers and artists. Biographies about artists and writers are sometimes some of the most complicated forms of biography. Not only does the author of the biography have to write about the subject of the biography, but also must incorporate discussion of the subject author's literary works into the biography itself. Literary biographers must balance the weight of commentary on the subject author's oeuvre, complete body of works, against the biographical content to create a coherent narrative of the subject author's life. This balance is interpretively influenced by the degree of biographical elements inherent in an author's literary works. The close relationship between writers and their work relies on ideas that connect human psychology and literature and can be examined through psychoanalytic theory. Literary biography may address subject authors whose oeuvre contains a plethora of autobiographical information and who welcome the biographical analysis of their work. Elizabeth Longford, a biographer of Wilfrid Blunt, noted, "Writers are articulate and tend to leave eloquent source material which the biographer will be eager to use." The opposite may also be the case. Some authors and artists go out of their way to discourage the writing of their biographies, as was the case with Kafka, Eliot, Orwell and Auden. Auden said, "Biographies of writers whether written by others or themselves are always superfluous and usually in bad taste. His private life is, or should be, of no concern to anybody except himself, his family and his friends." Well-received literary biographies include Richard Ellman's James Joyce and George Painter's Marcel Proust. Biographical fiction is a type of historical fiction that takes a historical individual and recreates elements of his or her life, while telling a fictional narrative, usually in the genres of film or the novel. The relationship between the biographical and the fictional may vary within different pieces of biographical fiction. It frequently includes selective information and self-censoring of the past. The characters are often real people or based on real people, but the need for truthful representation is less strict than in biography. The various philosophies behind biographical fiction lead to different types of content. Some asserts itself as a factual narrative about the historical individual, like Gore Vidal's Lincoln. Other biographical fiction creates two parallel strands of narrative, one in the contemporary world and one focusing on the biographical history, such as Malcolm Bradbury's To the Hermitage and Michael Cunningham's The Hours. No matter what style of biographical fiction is used, the novelist usually starts the writing process with historical research. 14. Biographical fiction has its roots in late 19th and early 20th century novels based loosely on the lives of famous people, but without direct reference to them, such as George Meredith's Diana of the Crossways 1885 and Somerset Maugham's The Moon and Sixpence 1919. During the early part of the 20th century this became a distinct genre, with novels that were explicitly about individuals' lives. Autobiographical fiction, or autofiction, is fiction that incorporates the author's own experience into the narrative. It allows authors to both relay and reflect on their own experience. However, the reading of the autobiographical fiction need not always be associated with the author.